Good afternoon. If you're wandering in, please feel free to grab a seat. Thank you for coming to the Distinguished Faculty Lecture. My name is Andrew Young. I'm the Academic Senate President. We are very happy to have this lecture today by Darren Leaver. We have an introduction for him that I will not be giving. Instead, it will be given by last year's DFA recipient, Joe Beeman. Last year, I was slightly disorganized, and at the beginning of our lecture here, as I asked Joe Beeman to come forward to give his introduction, I also want to present him with his DFA plaque. This is Joseph Beeman's DFA plaque from last year. Before he gives his introduction, I do want to mention a couple things. We have a reception for faculty immediately following this in the Student Center. Here's Joe Beeman.
So welcome, Dr. Vayar, and all of our GCC family and guests. It's my great honor to introduce our Distinguished Faculty Award winner for 2016, Professor Darren Leaver. Let me tell you a little bit about him, okay? Darren grew up in England, and his exposure to nature early in life created a great interest in geography, geology, and a desire to explore the world. This has led to a bachelor's degree in earth science, a minor in geology, and a master's degree in geography from Cal State University, Northridge. Along with teaching geography for the past 21 years here at GCC, Darren has applied his love for nature and travel to the job of designing and coordinating our study abroad program, which has created many travel opportunities for our GCC students all over the world. These once-in-a-lifetime educational experiences and personal growth opportunities are tremendous assets to Darren's students and his life as an educator. He has helped many students see the world with more careful global eyes. Darren has been instrumental in funding the development of Agang Kalia, a community development in Bali, and a foundation to provide free English language instruction for Balinese children in 3 rural villages. To date, Darren has explored approximately 75 countries, many of these with his wife Laura and their 2 amazing daughters, Kalia and Maya. Today, Darren is going to present his lecture entitled Field-Based Experiential Learning. A very timely lecture given that our technologically addicted culture keeps many indoors. Turn off your phones and other devices and give Darren your full attention as he will focus on his almost 40 years of observations in immersive learning environments and share his very valuable insights. So without further ado, I introduce you to our speaker and 2016 Distinguished Faculty Award winner, Professor Darren Leaver.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Okay.
Well, I thank you all for coming today. You can see what the presentation is about. It's going to be a little bit about... Let me figure out how to use this real quickly. There we go. Geography and experiential learning. I'm going to break this down into several components here. First of all, I'm going to introduce myself a little bit more than what Joe had just done. And talk about the nature of geography, because there are many people here that, even though they've been exposed to geography to some degree, they might not have a complete understanding of what geography covers. I'm then going to talk about experiential learning, and then how that applies to geography. And I'm going to use a model, that of atmospheric circulation, to have a little exercise for us to do in class here, and also to show how my travel experiences have shaped my knowledge of atmospheric circulation, and also how students have been exposed to some of these opportunities also. And then I have a few concluding remarks. So here we go. My early influences. These are my parents. As we grow up in England, we call them mum and dad, not mom and dad. I grew up in an orphanage. Not too many people know that. I'm not an orphan. My parents ran an orphanage, and we had a county, the county of Leicestershire. We had what we called a children's home. So I constantly grew up with 16 other brothers and sisters. And that's me right there. And look, gloomy weather, I got used to that. So I wanted to understand what that's all about when I came to America. So Leicestershire is pretty much in the smack dab middle of England. You couldn't get further away from a coast on an island. So I wanted to get out and see what the coast was like. My dad traveled quite a bit when he was young. During World War II, he was about 7 or 8 years old. And he traveled around with Italian gypsies going around small towns throughout England in basically a circus environment. So that might explain a lot about me, actually. Leicester is not that famous unless you're a football fan or a soccer fan. They're the English champions of the EPL. Other than that, they're an old coal mining and industrial area. And of course, when I was growing up, the coal mines were shutting down and the industry was changing to more of services. Now, one interesting thing, this is an area where you might recognize David Attenborough. He grew up in Leicester also, and some of his early inspirations were the fossils found just in the hills outside of Leicester, including Charnia. That's named after Charnwood Forest, which is a forest area I would go explore when I was a kid, and that kind of got me interested in exploring nature as a potential career field. 1979 was about 4 years after moving to the U.S. I came here when I was 11 with my family. When I was 15, I was in my junior year, going to senior year in high school, and I decided with a high school friend, we went to travel all the way around England and into Europe. So at 15 years old, that didn't seem abnormal to me. I had worked throughout my high school years. I got a work permit early, so I worked in the summers. I worked after school, and saved up enough to go travel to Europe for 6 to 7 weeks. My daughter is currently 15 years old. There's no way on earth I would ever let her go to Europe to travel by herself. In the 1980s, my college years, I would take my student loans and I would travel every summer to Europe as much as I possibly could. I learned about trains. I learned about getting on a train and going to a city, waking up there, seeing that city, getting on the train, and going to another city. So it cut the cost down. I slept in luggage racks. I couldn't do that anymore, by the way. But at that age, I could do that. So here's some pictures of me. This is in, that was Yugoslavia up here. What was Yugoslavia? Of course, Paris. And basically, at that point, I'm traveling around for weeks with a suitcase about that big, containing everything in the world that I would possibly need. And it kind of got me to believe there are things in this life that you want and things in this life that you need, and you certainly are thrust into that realization when you travel. Now, I graduated with an MA in July of 1991, and about a week later I was on a plane to do a around-the-world trip. Just coincidentally, one of my travel heroes, Michael Palin, some people, you may know him from Monty Python, but he's also a very avid traveler. And he did a trip, which he later called Around the World in 80 Days. This is the exact same time, and he took a very similar path to what I did. So not only was he a travel hero, I could really relate to some of the places that he had seen because I saw them myself. And he's right. When you get bit by that travel bug, it's with you forever, and you may as well give up on being rich because you're going to spend all your money on traveling. It's rich in a different way, and I think that's what I'm trying to impart on students too, that there are certain things that we define our richness by, and I think travel and travel experiences are certainly one of the most important. So when I was traveling around the world at that time, travel guidebooks, especially the Lonely Planet series, those are full of information, and my backpack was full of about this many books. So at any one time, probably 2/3 of the weight was film, camera gear, and guidebooks. So since 1996, when I got hired here at GCC, I've been doing a lot of travels with students and also with my wonderful family. My wife Laura also teaches geography here at GCC, and my 2 kids are a little bit bigger than this now, but we've been traveling together as a family since Kalia, who's now 15, was 7 weeks old. We went to the Cook Islands, Australia, New Zealand, 7 months old, so she got the travel bug pretty early. Of course, now she doesn't want to go anywhere. She just wants to stay home with her friends. Not entirely true, right? So I just added it up, 74 countries, including this one. And that might sound like a lot, but there's pretty much 200 countries to visit. So I've got a lot of work still left to do. So what are my current job duties? I am a geography professor, so part of my job is to incorporate my travel experiences into my teaching of primarily these days physical geography and physical geography labs, but also to take my travel experiences and incorporate that into study abroad, and take my geography knowledge and incorporate that into the design of study abroad programs. And both of these support this experiential field-based learning. So they go hand in hand very well. So what is geography? I alluded to that a lot of people have an idea of what geography is, but they don't really know how all-encompassing it really is. So basically, the study of places and the relationships between people and their environments. So we're exploring the physical properties of the earth and the human societies that inhabit it. We're also looking at how human cultures interact with the natural environment and how the natural environment is impacting people to some degree. So we're trying to understand where things are on this planet, why they are there, how they develop, and how they change over time. A graphic of this might be a little bit better for us to comprehend. So geography is sitting in the middle of this complex interaction of the social sciences and the physical sciences. So geography has links to history through historical geography, how things were distributed in the past. The politics and voting patterns also plays a part in political geography. We have economics and economic geography, so that looking at the global patterns of commerce. And where my specialty has been over the years is in this area over here, that link between people, climate, and meteorology, and with that of geology. In fact, my minor was in geology, and that was actually my first major before I became more interested in a more, what I would say, holistic view. So geography, sitting in the center of this, is at the interaction of all these different disciplines, and it's a fascinating place to be. Now, what about experiential learning? We heard that term a number of times already today, but it's defined as a process of learning through active experience and reflection. Now, this requires participating in some kind of activity, then thinking about that activity. What worked? What didn't work? And then concluding, well, if this thing didn't work, I'm going to develop a plan to implement next time around. So it's a cyclical experience of of actively being involved and then reflecting upon it, making those changes, and being involved again. So this way we continually learn and improve by actively engaging ourselves in a process. Now for geography, this applies to students as well as faculty. So for faculty, we pretty much are implementing this, much to our chagrin sometimes, by implementing something in the classroom, seeing how it worked, assessing how it worked, thinking about making a change to that, implementing again. Sounds familiar? Those student learning outcomes? So we're kind of familiar with that to some degree. But in the lab environment, or in the field, we're constantly learning new lessons and implementing those so that every time the field activity becomes better and a little bit more in tune to what we're trying to achieve. Now, this model is based on David Kolb's model of experiential learning. So again, participate, review and reflect, conclude, adapt, make a plan, go again. So this ties into many social sciences this way too. Now, why do we do this? If we look at the average retention rates for students in passive learning environments versus active learning environments, we can see that students retain much less when they're not involved, and they retain much more when they are involved. And of course, the culmination of this would be to actually have students to teach their fellow students. That's how that deep knowledge can really occur. What we're going to focus on is being in this area here, practice by doing. So where do we do this at GCC? We do it in our lab environments. You might recognize some of the students here, even today. They're actively involved in measuring relative humidity and temperature in the classroom here, but in the classroom it's a little bit limited as far as one side of a classroom and another side of the classroom having differences. You go out into the field and now we can really see some of those differences and understand, well, what makes it different on one side of a ridge and another side of a ridge? I can see some smiles here because some of the students say, hey, we were just there. Well, if we go down to Baja, California, we can really see some differences. Go out to the other side of the planet, we can see some true differences. You might recognize some of our fellow faculty here. Lola Taylor, retired. Lena is down there. I think she's looking at her phone. Kim Fong Chong. And yours truly without a beard. My kids say, every time I shave it off, put it back, put it back. In the end, when we employ this type of mechanism for learning, we can see the success rates. Those students that are still around past the drop deadline, getting A's, B's, and C's, is pretty high for study abroad. There are other reasons for this too, by the way. If someone's oversleeping on a study abroad program, we go wake them up. We physically bring them into the classroom. We don't have that luxury here on campus so much. Now, what about linking geography with experiential learning? I want to use an example here of the general circulation model of our atmosphere. And to do that, I'm going to have to change my location here just 1 second. I want you to look at this as it starts to roll. And there's a few things I want you to focus on. So I'm going to have to keep coming back to here to reset. But this is, what you're going to see is light white colors. That's representing clouds. You're going to see some orangey red colors, and those are going to represent rainfall. So here, let's put this into motion. And look, the clock is ticking January, and this will go all the way till December. A few things I want you to look at here. Number one, you see these little bands coming in? Any guess what those are? Those are storm fronts heading in towards the west coast, and some of them make it, some of them don't. And look at this, January, February, March, we should expect to have some of those. Anybody recognize this location over here? India. And for February, do you see much going on in India over here? Much in the way of cloud cover? Probably not, right? Now, one of my favorite places over here is Indonesia. You can't see it right now. Why would that be? All right, so in February, lots of cloud cover over there. Also, Tanzania, we're going to take a little visit to Tanzania today, and we're seeing some cloud cover over there. And maybe Machu Picchu in Peru. We'll see some cloud cover over here in February, March. Now, if I was to forward this into, let's say, around June, I'm going to take a guess that June's right around here. Well, I went too far. We're going to June and July. Are we going to see too many of those storms coming into the west coast of the Americas? No, it's something blocking them out there. Hey, what's going on? Where did India go? Right, so something's going on over there with India, lots of rainfall. In fact, that's a monsoon season. So being in July, oh, what's going on over here by Machu Picchu and Cusco, Peru? We're seeing more of a clearing, correct? Okay, now we still see under here, this is July and August, we still see that Indonesia is under cloud cover, but it's not as much as what we saw previously. Now, if I was to take this image and forward it every 3 months, I want you to look at what happens with this line running very close to the equator. See this line right here? Let's look at that. Where's that line in January? Where is it in March? What's happening to that line? Which direction is it shifting? It's shifting north. And guess what else shifts north as we get into July? The place where the sun's rays are hitting the earth at 90 degrees, we call the subsolar point, that's moving into the northern hemisphere. And what's following it? This band of clouds right here. This is the band of rainy weather, of rising air that we call the ITCZ, or Intertropical Convergence Zone. Now, what I want to do right now is make sense of what we're seeing here by using a model. And a model is one for atmospheric circulation. And I'm going to draw this out for you. Now, some of you have already a little handout. Anybody need pens? I have about 20 pens in here. They're free. I don't even want them back. You can have them afterwards. It's okay. Anybody? All right, there we go. All right. So this is what we're going to do. Everybody can see that okay? I know it's a little bit fuzzy. But what's going on at the equator in terms of temperature? Is it warm? Is it cold? Is it? Okay, it's pretty warm. Now, warm air wants to typically go in one direction, and that is it wants to go up, because warm air expands. As it expands, it becomes less dense. As it becomes less dense, it wants to rise. So as that air gets warm at the surface, it's going to rise. Now, I can't draw air rising from here. It's impossible for me to draw in that third dimension, but I can draw it this way. That means if we take that all the way around the globe, it would also be rising over here. Okay, so we have air rising. Now, to be honest, as that air rises, it's like, let's take this to its logical conclusion, it's like you being sucked up. The air molecules are rising up like you could be sucked up off the ground. And if you looked at the ground itself and the air, the weight of the air would be less than normal, less than average. So rising air is usually associated with low pressure. And since this low pressure is at the equator, we refer to this as the equatorial. Is that writing showing up okay there? The equatorial low pressure zone. Now also what happens is, as that air rises, it starts to cool. As it starts to cool, that gas tends to compress a little bit. And the first gas to get booted out of our mixture of gases that make up air, the first gas to get booted out is water vapor. So it gets booted out from being a vapor. Doesn't mean it's gone. It just changes its phase from gas to liquid. And we call that water. Well, we don't call it rain yet. We call that water. Now, water droplets, they're all forming up in the atmosphere. Now, they're heavier than air, but they don't fall down because the air is moving up. So it's like a little bubble being trapped in the air. Now, if we got billions and trillions of these, they start to look like this. Now those droplets of water hit each other, and then a little one hits another little one, becomes a medium one. A medium one hits a little one, becomes a large hits another large, becomes extra large. And at some point, that surface area is such that its weight now allows it to fall down through the clouds. And what do we call that? Now we've got precipitation. And in the tropics, that's predominantly as rain. So what do we have at the equator in general? An area of rising air and low pressure called the equatorial low, and it's associated with warm air at the surface and lots of rainfall. Another name for that, by the way, and I'll spell this out in 1 second, but I'll give you the initials right now, is the ITCZ. That's short for Intertropical Convergence Zone. And that's what we find very close to the equator. Now that air cannot rise and rise and rise forever. It's going to have to stop at some point, and that's usually the top of our lower atmosphere, our lowest layer of our atmosphere called the troposphere. So that air is going to rise to the top of the troposphere, hit a ceiling basically, and then the air is going to have to split. So as it splits, some will make its way to about 30 degrees north latitude, and some will make its way to about 30 degrees south latitude, and that air will sink down. Now, if the only way to get air to form clouds is to have air rise, what's going to happen when air sinks? Clouds. Now, if you're in an area near the tropics where the sun is going back and forth through the seasons, but there's no clouds, what kind of environment would you expect? Because if you have no clouds, you have no rain. So in these areas, we have what's called the subtropical. Sinking air would not be low pressure, but it instead would be high pressure. So this is a subtropical high pressure zone. We have one in the northern hemisphere, and we have one in the southern hemisphere. Sinking air. This is where we get most of the world's deserts. So the great deserts of the world are found very close to 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south. And by the way, to complete the cycle, that air will hit the surface, and it will make its way back towards 30 degrees north and back towards, from 30 degrees north to the equator and then back towards the equator in the southern hemisphere, completing a cycle. There's a name for that cycle. These are called Hadley cells. Now, if we have sinking air over here, we also have sinking air over here. And that air is going to make its way across the surface to about 60 degrees north, and that will rise too. And at 60 degrees north and 60 degrees south, we have our second area of low pressure, but this is located just outside of the polar regions, so we call this the subpolar low. The same here. You still following? Yep. All right. One last cycle to complete. Air going up at 60 degrees. That's a low pressure cell, is going to make its way all the way above the North Pole and sink down before moving across the surface. And the same in the southern hemisphere. Above the South Pole, air is going to sink down. So can you tell me something about what would you expect at the South Pole and North Pole? Would that be high pressure or low pressure? It's going to be high pressure, right? Sinking air, high pressure. Clouds or no clouds? No clouds. So over here we have what's called the polar high. Hard to read there. I'm sorry because my pen is getting a little bit smudged. And over here we also have a polar high. So if we look at this, our entire planet, according to this model, is divided into 30-degree belts, and those go high, low, high, low, high, low, high pressure, alternating bands of pressure. What is the air doing in between them? What do you call it when air moves across the surface? Wind. So this air is trying to get from 30 north to the equator. It's trying to move south. This air is trying to move from 30 south to the equator. It's trying to move north. This air is trying to go from 60 degrees to 30 degrees. Sorry, from 30 degrees to 60 degrees, high pressure to low pressure. And here we got from 30 degrees to 60 degrees and from 90 degrees. This is the direction that the air is trying to go. So trying to go south, trying to go north, trying to go south, trying to go north, trying to go south, trying to go north. Again, a land of opposites, but always moving from high pressure to low pressure, high pressure to low pressure, following some general rules. And on the handout I gave you, I put down what some of those rules are. Now, in general, this is the area, this is direction that the air is trying to move. It doesn't mean that that actually gets there, because we have one more thing to contend with, and that's called the Coriolis effect, which means because the equatorial regions are rotating around about 25,000 miles in one day, yet the poles are just spinning around, there's an effect that makes air basically split or bend to the right of its intended path in the northern hemisphere, the left of its intended path in the southern hemisphere. So look what happens to these areas of wind. This air is trying to move north, but it's in the southern hemisphere, so it's going to get bent in a path like this. That's the direction the air actually flows. And because it's coming from the southeast, we call this area, the winds of this area, the southeast trade winds, or southeast trades. Have you heard that term before? Trade winds. Okay, high pressure to low pressure, northern hemisphere to the right of its path. Remember, this is the path that the air is moving. It looks like I'm drawing something going to the left, but it's to the right of the path of that air. And this air, coming from the northeast, this is called the northeast trades. I'm making a very busy diagram, I understand that, but I think it's important that when looking at diagrams like this, if I just showed you that diagram, it's like saying, here's a car, can you build that for me? Versus, here's a car, let's take it apart, let's build it back together. Now, we might not still be able to do it, but we'd have a better understanding of how it's done. So in this case here, we're building this model this way. Here we have westerly winds in this area because the air is trying to go north. It gets bent a lot to the right. There's more Coriolis force the closer you get to the poles. So these winds are called the westerlies. They're blowing from the west. Same thing in the southern hemisphere. We have westerlies. Almost finished now. And then finally we have air sinking at the North Pole, and it's going around and around and around to the right, so we have air going like so. And we call these the polar easterlies. Unfortunately, as you get closer to the poles, you got less area to write upon. So I'm going to just here say P-E for polar easterlies. So that's our model. That's our model of explaining what is going on in the diagram that we had shown, in the video that we had shown previously. So to understand what's going on in this diagram, we could now see that maybe right across here we have the ITCZ. There are some other areas that don't show up right now of low pressure. In this particular, in August, they'd be in the southern hemisphere, so 2 areas of low pressure. Then we've got an area right in here where we live, about 34 degrees north, where sometimes we have storms come and sometimes we don't. So let me try to have you understand a little bit better about why it is that this diagram or this video makes sense relative to the diagram that we just drew. Look familiar? So we got the equatorial low. Anybody remember what the other name for that was? Or the initials at least, right? The ITCZ, Intertropical Convergence Zone. What's converging there? The trade winds converging at the equator, and then that air will rise up and give us those thunderstorms. Subtropical high, we've got the subpolar low associated with what we call here the polar front, and the polar high. So here's our high, low, etc. Okay, so this diagram should make a little bit more sense right now. Now, we are located right about here, 34 degrees north latitude, and this is the area where in the wintertime, as the storms move from west to east, we get those occasional storms that drop down from the subpolar low into the westerlies, and those storms travel from west to east, caught in the westerly winds. So that will explain a little bit about what we saw. Now, the ITCZ, Intertropical Convergence Zone, that's an area of low pressure and rising air at the equator. So the equator is quite a wet place. The trade winds, those are the winds blowing between 30 degrees and the equator in both hemispheres. We have the subtropical high. That's an area of sinking air. And what did I say is associated with that sinking air? At 30 north and 30 south, we have the great deserts of the world. The westerly is the zone that we live in, between 30 degrees and 60 degrees north and 30 degrees to 60 degrees south latitude. And that's where the storms will blow in that hit our coast and continue off to the east. The subpolar low, if you've ever been up towards the Aleutian Islands or maybe northern Norway, it looks like this an awful lot. It's gray because cold air, even though it rises, it doesn't hold quite as much moisture. So you get lots of drizzle in those areas. And finally, you get north of there, and we're in the area towards the North Pole at least, of the polar easterlies, and lots of wind blowing around and blowing around and blowing around. Not a whole lot of precipitation, to be honest, but an awful lot of wind blowing that snow around. And finally, you get up to the North Pole. What looks unusual about this? I know it's not a great picture, but that is a submarine at the North Pole. The North Pole is basically it's in an ocean, right? It's the Arctic Ocean. It's our smallest ocean, but it is an ocean. So this is just a few feet thick here at different times of the year. So this is a USS Hawkbill up at the North Pole. What do you notice about the air here? Yeah, not much in the way of clouds. It is sinking air in this area, and that means not so much in the way of rainfall, not much in the way of precipitation. But when it does precipitate, it hangs around for quite some time. All right, so there's our model. Now what I want to do is look at, now that I've told you this is how the model works, I want to tell you it doesn't really work that way. Because the model is for an all-water planet. A planet that is made out of all water. Well, we don't live on an all-water planet. We live on a planet about 70% water, let's say. And 70% is still a sea, so it's still good, right? It's still passing. Well, we can get beyond that. Most of us live pretty close to a coast. In fact, everybody in this room lives pretty close to a coast. So along coastlines, this works pretty well. But we do have to realize that there are two major things that we have to address in this model. Number one, the model is impacted by the presence of land. So if you imagine, you're supposed to have an area of, let's say, high pressure, but you have land adjacent to it, and that land heats up, that air above the land wants to rise up. It's going to mess that whole system up. On the other hand, our sun migrates into the northern hemisphere, reaching its zenith in late June, and then migrates towards the southern hemisphere. And all of these belts move back and forth and back and forth and back and forth with the seasons. So basically, remember the ITCZ, which is supposed to be at the equator? Its average position is actually 6 degrees north of the equator, because what do we have a lot of in the northern hemisphere that we don't have so much in the southern hemisphere? All these land masses. Those are going to impact that entire model by having more heat transferred from land into the atmosphere compared to what's going on with the southern hemisphere. So here we have the ITCZ with a northerly track in the Pacific Ocean as well as in the Atlantic Ocean, even over the water. But look what happens over land. You get the presence of a big landmass like Eurasia, and this ITCZ gets pulled up as far as about 25 degrees north of the equator in July. And for the southern track, the southernmost extent, probably about 20 degrees south of the equator in both South America, Africa, but not so much in Australia. But we can see that this is not following the model unless we understand that's just a model. If we take away these variables, a variable being land and seasons, it would work. But we have land and we have seasons. It's still a model that will explain an awful lot for us. So what we're going to do here is look at how the model can help explain why we get dry summers and wet winters in LA, the location of our major deserts, and we've already alluded to that, and why there are better weather times to visit places like India, Nepal, Tanzania, Peru, and Bali. So let's start first of all with what's going on with LA's summers and LA's winters. So a lot of people, if I ask them, why is it cold in winter, they'd have a good explanation. For us, in winter, the sun has moved into the southern hemisphere, the sun's at a low angle, it's not up as many hours, but a lot of people don't really know why is it that we get our moisture in the winter. It's a different question. So let's explore that. First of all, we are located 34 degrees north of the equator. We should be at the boundary between the subtropical high pressure zone and the zone to the north of that, the westerlies. So let me just show you really quickly. This is January. For January, LA is right over here. And you see that high pressure zone right there? It's basically off the coast of Mexico in January. But look at July. Because the sun has migrated into the northern hemisphere, it's pushed the zones to the north, and now that high pressure zone is located off the coast of Oregon. So for July, what that means is any storms trapped in the westerlies can't find a way into LA. However, in January, they have a track in towards LA. So that high pressure system is very important in allowing or not allowing storms to come through. Let me elaborate on that 1 second. This looks familiar, right? LA in the summertime. In the morning hours, the sky is pretty clear. Yes, there's a little bit of cloud cover, but not a lot. It's largely clear days. And when the sun's up and we have, at a high angle, we have clear days, it's going to heat up quite a lot in the summertime. Now, if we look at January, there, that high pressure cell moving down a little bit south. Now it's off the coast of Mexico, and that opens a door up right there for these storms generated from the subpolar low to come into LA. So there's our track. And by the way, it's easier for that track to hit here, easier for it to hit Seattle or Portland or Northern California. Still pretty hard to get all the way down to LA, but that's our door open, is in the wintertime when we have that Pacific high pressure zone move to the south. So does it look familiar, by the way? What was it like on Sunday? Kind of like this, right? We got a low pressure system that moved in because the door had opened up, and here comes our stormy weather. Now, as I said, if you look at this map right here, the dark blue colors mean lots of rainfall annually, and as you get to the orangey colors, that means less and less and less. So it's easier to hit Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, and by the way, the mountains, right? We have mountain uplift or orographic uplift. But down here in the LA area, we're getting about 10 to 15 inches of rainfall compared to over 50 in some of the areas up here. Now, I just want to throw this one in there because it's wintertime, and for the last 3 winters in a row, we started to have this high pressure zone appear off the coast of Oregon and Washington. It isn't really supposed to be there, but there's some long-term atmospheric oceanic interactions occurring that have put a blob of warm water and high pressure off the coast, not allowing our storms in. Even though last year was an El Nino year, a year we would typically get a lot of rainfall, this ridge of high pressure, which has got a great name, by the way, ridiculously resilient ridge of high pressure blocking our storms. And what that meant is that Northern California all the way up through the Pacific Northwest, they got plenty of rainfall, but you go from San Francisco south, or south of San Francisco and south, and we've really been drying out, as have a lot of the western states. Now, the second thing I want to discuss is, or how this model plays out, location of major deserts. So basically, our deserts, our major deserts of the world, are centered around 30 degrees north latitude and 30 degrees south latitude. So look at some of these. We've got the Sonoran Desert and the Colorado Desert, Sahara Desert. We've got the Arabian Desert. In South America, you've got the Atacama Desert, Patagonian Desert, Kalahari, Namib, Australia, the Great Sandy Desert, the Gibson Desert, Victoria Desert, all very close to 30 degrees south and 30 degrees north. And this is explained by the presence of that sinking air with that high pressure zone. Now, I've taken lots of students on field trips into the desert. It's a fantastic place to look at geology because there's very little in the way of soil and sediment covering over a lot of the bedrock. My first trip into a developing country was back in 1991. I went to Cairo, Egypt. And we look at this. These numbers you see here in green, these represent millimeters of rainfall. So let me just say that right about here, 25 millimeters will be about 1 inch of rainfall. And what we're seeing month by month is a little smattering of winter rainfall for Cairo, Egypt, and pretty much none at all as you get into the summer months. So dominated by high pressure, enough to really suppress rainfall and give a desert environment. So I was there in 1991. Yes, that's me, and that's me, and that's me. People say I'm looking very French there. Now, it was my first night in the developing world. I traveled quite a bit before it, but never to the developing world. And I was traveling on a budget of $10 to $15 per day for everything. So I had to really choose accommodation pretty seriously. So I found my first accommodation, went there, and we're about 3 stories up. At nighttime, it got really, really, really hot. This was September. It's a pretty hot month. So we opened the windows up. And about 4 hours later, I woke up just itching like crazy because mosquitoes had come in and just eaten me up. It didn't sleep very well at all. So the next day, I switched to a room with an overhead fan. And I realized one of the great epiphanies of traveling in the tropics. An overhead fan. It cools you off. You string your laundry up and it dries really quickly. And the mosquitoes can't land on you. They just keep on blowing away. Another thing I learned about was bargaining, because this photograph right here, we were at the pyramids, we're going around, didn't want to do the touristy thing. But this guy, he came up to us and said, look, take a picture with the camel. Take a picture, camel, pyramids in the back. No, we're on a budget. No, really. No, we don't have any money. No money for me. Just take the picture. So put a little headdress on, lean back on the camel, take a picture. All right, give him the stuff back. He said, okay, £2. For £2, you said no money. I said, no money for me. That's for camel. So when is the best weather for tropical destinations such as India and Nepal, Tanzania, Peru, and Bali? Just a few examples I want to throw in here. And by the way, I'm going to throw a few quotes in here every now and then, some of my favorite authors, and Bill Bryson being one of those. I think it is great to travel. It does give you that sense of not taking any day for granted. In fact, you can get joys out of the end of a day traveling and going, woohoo, clean laundry. I just did laundry today. I don't know how many of you did that this week at home, but probably very few, right? So India and Nepal, I traveled there as part of that round the world trip in 1991. I've been to Nepal several times since then. Nepal's up here, here's India. And what we're seeing is, look at that ITCZ in July. It's basically peaking right above northern India and Nepal. So that's not going to be a good time to go to India because that brings all that rainfall. However, when the ITCZ is not there, it's probably a good time. So if we look at January, that could be a good time to go to India. But for Nepal, up in the mountains, it gets really cold. So you want to be there either side of January. Let me elaborate on that. This is the ITCZ, Intertropical Convergence Zone, moving into India. And its typical track would be May, June, July. So if you get to India before May, yes, you can visit, no problems. But you get into June and July, it really gets rainy because that's pulling that moisture from the Indian Ocean towards India. That air is rising, squeezing that moisture out. Is very, very rainy. So throughout the summer months, April, May, June, July, 350 millimeters of rain is about 14 inches of rain in that month alone for Kathmandu, Nepal. That's what Santa Monica would get in a year. They would be getting in that month. And it's heavy, heavy rainfall. On the other hand, you go there January, December, and quite lovely. So Nepal, in the wet season, that doesn't look so good to me in terms of trekking ability or taking nice photographs, and it could be very dangerous. Now, if you go to higher elevation, even in the summertime, because some of these mountain passes are over 10,000 to 14,000 feet high, you can even get snow, even in their summer. But after the snows pull away, after the monsoon pulls away, you get treated to views like this. Machu Picchu Mountain, the Annapurna region of Nepal, just absolutely gorgeous. So pull away, September, October, November. You want to get there in October, and you're going to see these beautiful vistas. So I went there, first of all, in October 1991. I went to India, and I went to Nepal. And the reason I have this picture here, I got a shave in India. I don't know if you can see that. But at the end, I've had shaves before, and they put aftershave lotion on you, and then they put some in my ears. I'm like, what the heck? And then they set fire to my ears. And very quickly, they put it out. That's how they get rid of ear hair, apparently. They didn't tell me about that as I'm looking in the mirror, my face on fire. Another thing about India, I mean, look at that haircut. You gotta love it, right? So we went on to some of the small tracks between major rail lines to see what the rural areas were like. And in one in particular, we went there for a day, hopped back on the train. Remember, the rains have just ended. People are quite festive. Things are all decorated up. So we're buying local food, and I went and bought curries and ate that, and then had some bananas. So I'm on the edge of a railroad track, and I'm eating bananas, and basically at the end of it, I go, what do I do with the banana skin? So I walk down the aisle, the platform this way, and I walk down this way, and I'm looking, there's no trash can anywhere. So there's some gentlemen over on the side, very much like these gentlemen, and one of them finally gets up, he comes right over to me, and he looks me in the face, and he puts his hands out, and he takes the banana skins, and he walks over to the train tracks, and he throws them down into the train tracks. And then come all these goats and gobble up all the banana skins. And the man looked at me, and I'll apologize in advance for the accent, but he said, "Sir, you are entirely too civilized." And went back to sit with his friends. I went back to Nepal in 2001. Some of you might recognize this character right here. This is the former vice president of the school, Chris McCarthy. And Ingrid Slawski worked in the finance office for many years, so it was wonderful to spend some time with him back in February 2001. So we went trekking up after the monsoons into Nepal. Gorgeous. These are the kind of scenes you would get, just absolutely gorgeous. And you trek all day, and you sit in these chairs at the end, staying in tea houses and have a few coffees. Maybe 1 beer or 2 beers or 3 beers or maybe 4 beers, but a few. Look at the mountain. This is Machu Picchu, the mountain here, never been climbed, almost 8,000 meters high. Beautiful, beautiful vistas. Again, there's Chris over there. He's a wonderful man. He was a wonderful man. Now, I went back in 2003, the last time I went to Nepal. And one of the things in the developing world, again, like with the camel, you have to learn how to negotiate. And so you negotiate for pretty much everything, including accommodations. But I didn't bargain on this, and that was that late one night, we had a visit by Maoist rebels with their guns, showing us their guns, and they were demanding from everybody $100, because we're from America, it's $100 for you, it's less for other people. So I had to sit down for 45 minutes and negotiate for our group from $100 because we didn't take a lot of money with us. It doesn't cost a lot to be up there. So we finally got the bill down to $13.33 per person. And they wouldn't let me go. Now, what they didn't know is that I'd eaten some really bad Indian food earlier in that day, and I had to go, if you know what I mean. So I'm really just holding on in many, many different ways. And finally, they come back to me, and they look me right in the face, and he looks at me, and he hands me a receipt. And they say, when you go further up the mountain, there's going to be more of us. Just show them this. It tells them, you've already paid. So it wasn't so civilized at first. Very civilized towards the end. Now, Tanzania, one of the places that I've enjoyed going. I wanted to see what it's like in tropical Africa, both in the wet season and the dry season. So I went there in 2003 and again in 2010. Now, if we look here, this is where Tanzania is located, at least a portion I went to. If we go there in July and August, the ITCZ has moved out of that region, so it should be dry. And as you go into January and February, the ITCZ will actually peak at this location. That's about as far south as it will go in January. So because Tanzania is a little bit further north of the most southerly extent of the ITCZ, we would see a rainfall maximum occurring just before January and then just after January. And indeed, that's kind of what the charts show. So for Arusha, Tanzania, this is a gateway to the Serengeti and Ngorongoro crater, we see a peak of rainfall about November, December, and then it kind of calms down a little bit, and then back again, what they call the big rains in April. So you got the small rains and the big rains. So I wanted to target going there just before those rains and then during the rains. So here I was in October 2003. You can see the grasses are all brown from lack of moisture. There's still some grazing animals around, zebra and wildebeest, lions. And the first time I saw lions, I stopped with the guide, and the guide, we stopped. I go, oh yeah, lion. He said, no. I said, lion, I know that's a lion. No. Lion. No, lions. And there were lions all around us, and they had just blended so well into that grassy environment. One of the beauties of going during the season is that the water that is available makes the game congregate, so you can get a lot of good pictures at that point. The only thing is, there's not that many animals that hung around for the dry season. These guys are also very culturally interesting to see some of the youngsters out there with rites of passage. Now, I went again in April 2010. This is the rains on the plains. And look at this. This is a whole different environment here. Look at that Jeep. The animals were just so numerous. They'd just given birth. The zebra and the wildebeest had given birth to their young. The grasses are all green. The Jeep used to be green. There it is. Now, upon getting to this place, we're sliding all over. That mud gets so slippery that we got stuck a number of times. And one time we got stuck and we had to shove branches under there. And all of a sudden my wife had noticed, hey, look, there are lion tracks right here. It had only been raining for about 15 minutes before that, so we know they were pretty close. In fact, on this particular trip, this is where we slept. Here's our mucky Jeep. The toilet is just hiding out of view over here. And here we are set up having our dinner with some wine and water. And we probably had too much wine and too much water because around 3 a.m., I had to get up and go to the bathroom, which means getting out of the tent. And as I get up, I'm hearing this weird noise, and it's probably what made me wake up. And the noise sounded like, and my ear is next to the canvas of the tent. And all of a sudden it hit me. And I look over and there's my wife. She's been up for about a half an hour. She had to go to the bathroom, but she's going, lion. We waited another hour and a half for the light to come up, not have that noise there anymore. And finally we got up and looked around, and there were lion tracks all around. We also had baboons come and steal our bread, so we didn't have any bread on the trip. Still had the wine and the water. If they stole the wine, I'd be out there looking for them right now. I saw a movie a long time ago, and it was about cavemen, and they were like being chased by saber-toothed cats, and they climbed up these trees to get away from them. Wouldn't have worked very well, because in the Serengeti, these lions climb very, very well. So here we are in a Jeep looking up, and here are these lions right here. They're up there to get a good vantage point at this time, looking at all the game. So yeah, you can't really, they're much better climbers than we are. Lots of cheetahs, great landscape, and culturally very interesting too. You can do walking safaris out there. As long as you're with the locals, they know the good places to go, when it's safe, when it's not safe, most of the time. All right, Peru. So Cusco, Peru is right here where that red star is. So during July, it's dry. During January, pretty wet. I'll go through this pretty quickly. So Cusco, January, let's say December, January, February, pretty wet. Other times of the year, like July, June, quite dry. So you want to go there in June, July if you want to get the least chance of rainfall. My first trip there was 1998. I went back in 2001. This is actually Arequipa, Peru. And we climbed the top of this volcano here. It was quite an undertaking. We were then going to go from Arequipa to Juliaca, which is the airport for Lake Titicaca. But they closed the airport. We couldn't get there. So I had to very quickly find an alternate source of transport for 16 people and go overland, which gave us a beautiful vantage point, but this was our transport. A 1980s surfer van with 16 people in there, all of our luggage on the top. And we go across the Altiplano like this, beautiful stops. But the road hadn't yet been built. It was being built. So we got stopped every now and then, probably every 20, 30 miles. Stop, stop, stop. And the construction crew would come to us and they'd say, look, the road is closed. But the driver, knowing this beforehand, bought a stack of about 80 newspapers. So he'd roll the window down, talk to them for a second, and hand them 4 or 5 newspapers. And all of a sudden, the whole construction crew would come over and they'd look at the newspaper like, oh, go, 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 until the next one. So this is paper money in a whole different form right here. Going up to Machu Picchu, students in 2001. Getting towards the top. This pass right here is 14,200 feet high. It's called Dead Woman Pass. Probably aptly named because every breath you take, you're taking in about half as many molecules into your lungs. But when you get to the top, it's so much worth it. So dry season 2001. I went there again in November of 2012. And the only reason was I was on the internet and found I sound like a politician. I saw it on the internet. I found an airfare for $239 round trip into Peru. Like, we're going to Peru again. And my wife's shaking her head like, what? Okay, so we went beautiful time to go. Even then, we were lucky. A little bit more rainy than this time, but November, still worthwhile. And lastly, my last place, Indonesia. I'm kind of in love with Indonesia for its diversity. It's a very diverse place in terms of culture, geology, oceanography, etc. But I don't like going there so much in December and January when the ITCZ is over. But I do like going there June, July, August, September when the ITCZ has shifted further north. The views you get in each time of the year would look like this. This is the time to go. So November, December, January, February, very wet. Other times, a lot less so. So Bali in the wet season. And by the way, that also means a lot of trash gets washed out into the ocean. That's a big problem that Bali and all of Indonesia faces. But at the same point, during the dry season, it's absolutely gorgeous. The weather is very cooperative. And though it does rain, you can organize all your activities around that. And those activities include food, music, agriculture, hiking. Again, did I mention food? Religion is a very, very interesting form of Hinduism called Balinese Hinduism, and there's all kinds of explorations we can do with that, especially with classes like magic, witchcraft, and religion. These guys, look, these are the priests over there. You can interact with them, ask them questions. They'll answer anything, any question you have about their religion. The art and religion are very much tied together. We have students actually make offerings. This is Balinese insurance. You put that in the front of your car in the morning, and you won't get in an accident. You forget to do it, don't get in that car. Geology. Hey, Victoria. Oceanography. So it's very diverse in terms of what it offers for our students, and that's one of the reasons why we keep going back. It's not just it's one of my favorite places in the world, but it's one of those places that we can adapt classes to very well. One of the last things here, giving back to the community. We have 4 professors here at GCC, Larry McLaughlin, my wife Laura, and Cameron Hastings, myself. We created a nonprofit, abcbali.org, to give back to the children of Bali. So this provides free language classes for right now about 400 children in Bali. One of our schools named after Ryder Buck. Ryder was one of our students in 2013. He had just beaten testicular cancer, went on our program, and got back, and then about 2 months later in October, he got hit by a car and killed. So he left us very early. But his spirit endures, and we named one of the programs after him because he wanted to go back and volunteer some time in the schools over there. Wonderful young man, and he really embodies the spirit of a lot of our students here at GCC. They do want to do good, and we're there to help that path become a reality. Okay, so this is a Write a Book program. Some of our students have gone there to volunteer their time and have these kids learn English. Just about 2 minutes left here. So what's next up for GCC? We've got programs to Bali, Baja, Ireland, England, Italy, France. We are quite good, to be honest, at getting students out into the field and experiencing the world in the way it is, not the way that we modeled it to be. And I think that's a very, very important aspect of us being that premier institution we strive to be. What's next for me? I've been to all the red places. Well, not like all the red places. I mean, I click on there and it colors the whole thing red. But I haven't spent too much time up in the Arctic. I've been up into this region a little bit, and I got to explore more of the Arctic. I also want to get to the Antarctic. It's so out of the way, it's not even on this map. And it's very expensive to get there. Parts of Central Africa I want to go explore. I still got some places in Southeast Asia I have to explore. And of course, in South America, I haven't yet been to places like Colombia or Ecuador. I've seen Bolivia, but that was from a shoreline. I have to actually go visit. The lessons I've learned, to wrap up in about 90 seconds. Experiential learning is highly effective. It allows our students to have that really deep understanding of sometimes complex issues. Our students learn more when they're enjoying themselves, when they're involved in a learning experience. Plan ahead, but always expect the unexpected. Stuff is going to happen, and it's not so much it happening, it's how you react to it happening, how you adjust that really matters. So you have to assess, adapt, adjust, and implement so it's better next time. We can inspire our students, and they also inspire us. That happens all the time. One of the things I really learned, we have some amazing faculty here at GCC, and I've watched them out in the field, and the knowledge they have and how they impart it on students is just fantastic. And there are destinations that make our classes truly come to life. I'm 60 seconds away from wrapping this up. So I want to thank our staff. The staff here at GCC have been fantastic in helping with all of our programs, basically not only getting towards the process of implementing them, but all the planning that comes in hand with that. I get enormous help from the staff, and I appreciate that. The administration and the board, not every administration, not every board is supportive of field-based learning, and so far our administration and board have been on board with realizing that this type of learning is so important and so rewarding. Also, the foundation and associated students have financially helped our students be able to do some of these projects because some of our students just cannot afford to go on these programs. If I was to say to you, sign somebody up for your class, oh, by the way, ask them for $3,500 at the same time, our class enrollments would be way down. So to make that available to many of our students, the foundation and the associated students have been very instrumental. I also want to thank the prior DFA recipients, all of you, but I think the person that probably led the way here is Leonard DeGrassi, who sadly passed away this year, but his spirit is still very much alive here at GCC. Our students, again, you continue to energize us. I recognize some of you here. Watching students, we're going to say seeing a place with new eyes. I think seeing a place through the students' eyes, as well as my family's eyes, is to me, equally as exciting as seeing it for the first time ever myself. My colleagues, as I mean, oh, look at Emily! So my colleagues, and I couldn't get all of you on here, but basically, it's a pleasure working with the folks here at GCC. It really is. I learn something myself all the time, and working with this crew has been phenomenal. You're great to work with. In fact, Dominique is one of our adjuncts in geography, and she is one of 2 Teachers of the Year for K through 12 in LA County, and she's one of our adjunct instructors. I think she deserves a hand. Michael Reed, always a pleasure to talk to. Hey, wait a minute, what's that, Michael? My wife Laura is also adjunct here. And finally, my family. You support me more than you ever know. You make me look good. I know that my wife is the hardest working person in the world that I know. She makes me look good all the time. I take all the accolades sometimes. And I just want to make it clear, that koala, though it's the same color, is not mine. The rest of the family, yes. So, thank you for being today. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, before I forget again, I want to present the DFA plaque to Darren Leaver, and thank you again for the wonderful presentation.
Andy, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thanks, man.
Thanks again for all of you attending. For the faculty, there is a reception at the Student Center after immediately now. And I hope that you've all had a wonderful semester, and we look forward to future DFA awards.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Really, Darren.